Welcome BESCO team members to a topic that can't receive enough time and recognition: fall protection. I need you to try and grasp the importance of this training, as falls continue to be the #1 cause of fatalities in construction-related activities. Not so shockingly, fall protection continues to be the #1 most cited regulation because, for whatever reason, employees and employers can't seem to understand how important this topic is. Look, it's life and death. You'll hear me say this many times in the trainings I do, but I'm going to say it again. There's no product, no production demand, no schedule, no job worth you risking your entire life or even your quality of life. Those things are pennies compared to your worth and value. Even if you don't find yourself as worthy as I'm claiming you are, I can promise you that your family, friends, and teammates certainly do. So if anything, do these things for them. No matter how many stand downs contractors have around the country, no matter how many people die, no matter how many trainings we have, people still aren't getting it when it comes to fall protection. The OSHA violations are merely symptoms of the greater issue here, that false belief that you're invincible. I'm here to tell you that you're not. Men and women just like you and I continue to get on aerial lifts without harnesses. They continue to shortcut the simple step of tying off, using the wrong ladder, or using it improperly, or tricking themselves into believing that they're not that high. All of which happen far too often and lead to injury and death. Here are a few stats I want to share regarding fall protection that I find very interesting. Fall victims ranged in age from 18 to 72 years old, but most of the accidents were workers between the ages of 20 and 39. Falls resulted primarily from slippery surfaces, trips, or a loss of balance. The length of service did not appear to be a significant factor. However, the training did. The average amount of time away from work due to a fall is 60 days. 53% of the falls occurred at a distance of 10 feet or less. Most victims were not using fall protection. More accidents occur on a Monday than any other day, and more accidents occur in the morning than any other time of day. Okay, so there are many different categories that can fit inside the massive umbrella that is fall protection. But this is all a solid list you should be ensuring you and your BESCO teammates are strictly assessing and addressing. Look, about 700 lives are lost each year in U.S. industries, and roughly 100,000 workers are injured by falls each year. Let this next video set the tone of what we're talking about today. I will warn you that it may be considered graphic for some viewers. I hope that helps you realize what we're talking about today. When we get into tie-off requirements later on in the training, this is the kind of sad situation we're discussing, why it's important to have a plan and always tying off above 6 feet. And also the importance of where your material and equipment is related to those employees that are exposed to falls. All of that said, one of the greatest tools you can provide yourself with regarding this topic is the power of knowledge. So in this training, we're going to review when fall protection is required and talk specifically about personal fall arrest systems. All right, so big question here. When is fall protection required? The #1 rule for construction trades is fall protection is required whenever you are working 6 feet or more above the lower level. So the magic number for most fall hazards is 6 feet. And quickly, let me throw this in here because I realize that as steel erectors under Subpart R, it is federally allowable to utilize far more lenient tie-off requirements. But it's important we remind you that the BESCO requirements are 100% tie-off on anything over 6 feet. Number one, most GCs require this on their projects anyway, and number two, it's just a better and safer practice to follow. Now, back to answering that question of when fall protection is required. It's required when there is a hazard of someone falling into dangerous equipment or material, even if these items are less than 6 feet below you. That's because the dangerous equipment may be more of a hazard than the fall itself. Some examples of this could include working above rebar dowels, stored materials such as wood, trash, and steel, as well as heavy equipment. You also need fall protection around ramps, runways, walkways, excavation, hoist areas, holes, formwork, reinforcing steel, leading edge work, unprotected sides and edges, bricklaying, roof work, precast concrete erection, and wall openings. Finally, fall protection is also required when working surfaces are being inspected for fall hazards to ensure they're strong enough. I put this in here because of the newer laws that have been established, and I want everyone protected as they seek to implement them. All right, coming up next, we're going to discuss some fall protection systems and some practical tips on how you can prevent fall hazards from the get-go. When we talk about fall arrest systems, harnesses are the most common device, and they're very effective for both restraining and for arresting falls. The harness is connected by a lanyard and then to some sort of anchor point. Please note that the fall protection system you use is only as good as the anchor point you're attaching yourself to, so please be sure you have compliant anchors. Every anchor should be designed to support at least 5,000 pounds per person that it's attached to. So note that you may not have multiple people connected to a single anchor point unless it is rated to do so. Those calculations are based off of a per person data. The best case scenario is to have the anchor point located above you. If it is shoulder height or higher, this will reduce the length of the fall and reduce the possibility of swinging and hitting something. I'll bring this up again a little bit later, but the maximum allowable distance for a free fall is 6 feet. The further the fall, the greater the arresting forces on you. So that's why that height is the standard. Now, if you're ever unsure of what you're allowed to be anchored to, please speak to the competent person on your site or on your team. To help you a little here, you should never anchor to electrical conduits, water lines, guardrails, fencing, or anything else that is not rated to be an anchor point. It's as simple as that. There's no point in tying to an anchor if it's not strong enough to withstand the arresting forces of a fall. So, getting back to harnesses. When a harness is anchored properly, it's considered a fall restraint system. The harness and lanyard combo system allows for movement around the work site. Now, while we're on the topic of lanyards, I want to bring up some important differences between 4 to 6 foot shock absorbing lanyards and a retractable lanyard that moves in and out like a seatbelt. In my opinion, the far majority of fall hazards should be addressed using a retractable lanyard rather than a 4 to 6 foot shock absorbing lanyard. The reason for this is pretty simple. If you're 6 feet tall, you're wearing a 6 foot lanyard that also deploys approximately 10 to 11 feet, the height you have to be at in order for this fall protection system to protect you is at least 16 to 19 feet high. This also doesn't account for any equipment or material that might be stored or constructed below. The beauty of a retractable lanyard is that it does act like a seat belt, and so that as soon as it notices a change in tension, it immediately locks up. With this type of scenario, the retractable lanyard starts to act more like a fall restraint system rather than a fall arrest system. In other words, preventing you from having an actual fall in the first place. Some other important considerations you need to know regarding effective personal fall arrest systems are: number one, the system should be set up to have a maximum arresting force of 1,800 pounds. So you got to do a little math to ensure you're within this range, but the force of the stop is determined by your body weight and the distance of the fall. The arresting force is equal to your weight times the distance. The more you weigh and the further the fall, the more force it takes to stop that fall. Number two, a free fall should be no more than 6 feet, as we discussed earlier. The fall arrest system should be set up in such a way to make sure of this limit. At a 6 foot fall distance, you would need to weigh more than 300 pounds to suffer arresting forces of greater than 1,800 pounds. Now look, some of you watching this could be over 300 pounds, and you need to take these calculations seriously. Number three, this may seem obvious, but we see it on audits all the time. The system has to be set up to prevent you from contacting a lower level during a free fall. So do the math before you start the project or operations to determine how much room you need and whether or not that 6-foot shock absorbing lanyard is actually protecting you. Number 4, the system must bring you to a complete stop and limit the distance in which you decelerate to no more than 3.5 feet. There will be less arresting force if you can decelerate for a few feet rather than come to a sudden stop. Although there are more items we could look at. Number 5, the personal fall arrest system must be designed to withstand twice the potential for impact forces of someone falling for a distance of 6 feet. So, to close this section off, I want to play a quick video that shows what it looks like to have a lanyard do its job. Had these workers not been wearing fall protection, it would have been a much different video. Okay, in closing, I have to briefly touch on 2 more important elements, ensuring you have a solid fall protection program. Number 1 is inspecting your personal fall arrest equipment before every use. Your life could literally be depending on the condition of that equipment, and it can't be taken for granted. Just because you used it the day before doesn't mean it's in the same condition. So, common things to check are D-rings and snap hooks for any sign of cracking, breaking, or deformation. Check the ropes, straps, and tongue buckle for cuts, tears, abrasions, loose stitches, and other defects. Ensure that all moving parts are able to move freely and are operating as designed. Snap hooks should work easily and lock correctly. And if they aren't smooth or locking easily, that's considered defective and they need to be replaced. Rope grab devices and retracting lifelines should also be working correctly. Defective equipment and harnesses should be tagged out of service and replaced with functional equipment. Now, July is the month that we take inventory of all fall protection equipment and conduct the annual review of everything we have within BESCO. Look, it's important we take these steps to keep the standard high in our equipment. Now, regarding a rescue plan, right from the get-go, let me state very clearly that 911 cannot be a rescue plan. We just dealt with a recent fatality where a worker passed out on a scissor lift for unknown reasons and onto the controls, forcing the lift to continue to raise him to the beam above, crushing him. There was no plan, and by the time the EMTs arrived, his brain had been without oxygen for far too long. This is just one of the hundreds of stories that happen in the U.S. workforce each year. The purpose of an effective rescue plan is to safely, in the shortest time possible, rescue a worker who's had a fall. It's also important to minimize the time being suspended after a fall because of getting what's called suspension trauma. When an individual is suspended in an upright position, gravity is pulling blood down into the lower legs. Eventually, the flow of blood and oxygen to the brain is reduced. If you were standing on the ground when these flows are reduced, you would faint and become horizontal, which is exactly why we faint, to get our body in the most level position for equal blood flow back to the vital organs and especially to the brain. But when you're suspended in an upright position, you'll faint and still remain vertical, meaning recirculation can't occur. So I highly recommend that if you have a harness, you buy a pair of these deployable steps so that if you are suspended in a harness, you have the ability to step into something where you can both support and flex your legs, allowing blood flow to remain constant until you get rescued. But look, at every job you do where falls are present, you must have a rescue plan mapped out and trained on. This includes any equipment that's expected to be used in the event of that emergency. It's not enough just to have it on site for a comfortable feeling. Key personnel need to be trained on how to use it when needed. And with that, I'm Jake Wolfenden with the BESCO safety team, and I can't express how important it is to keep these fall protection measures at the forefront of your mind. Please take it seriously and use this training as a time to make your practices and your daily operations surrounding fall hazards that much stronger. I look forward to seeing you in the next training.